The deadlock and the fateful crossroads. What is the exact price of a woman's pride? In the glittering, cutthroat heart of Manhattan, souls aren't bought with fire and brimstone. They are purchased with forged marriage licenses, cold corporate calculations, and a flawless 7-carat diamond that feels exactly like a pair of handcuffs. Imagine sitting in a room where a single glass of water costs more than you've spent on groceries in an entire month, knowing that if you walk out that door empty-handed, you and your innocent 7-year-old child might be sleeping on the unforgiving pavement tomorrow. Would you sell your life to a total stranger? Would you sign away your reality to become a billionaire's beautiful little lie? Billionaire Bliss Audio warmly welcomes you to a story where romance is born not from a fairy tale, but from pure, unadulterated desperation. If you find yourself captivated by tales of shattered masks, ruthless ambition, and the dangerous game of fake vows, please hit that subscribe button right now. Your support fuels our passion and gives us the ultimate motivation to bring you more breathtaking stories that you simply cannot pause. I have always believed that New York City has a cruel sense of humor, and nowhere was this more evident than inside the dining room of Billionaire. It is the kind of establishment where the crystal chandeliers look like frozen rain, and the air is thick with the scent of white truffles, Wagyu beef, and unbridled arrogance. It is a sanctuary for the elite, an impenetrable fortress of wealth. But if you looked closely, past the clinking of expensive champagne flutes and the velvet-draped chairs, you would find her, Natalie Parker. Watching her sit in that secluded corner was like watching a fragile bird trapped in a gilded cage. She wore a modest black dress that she had meticulously ironed, but no amount of pressing could hide the frayed edges of the fabric. Those worn threads were the map of a life washed and wrung out too many times by the brutal, calloused hands of poverty. She didn't belong in this world of careless whispers and limitless credit lines. She was only there for a lifeline, a make-or-break job interview that had just evaporated into thin air because the executive she was supposed to meet simply didn't care enough to show up. When I look at Natalie in that moment, I don't just see a woman needing a paycheck. I see the agonizing, crushing weight of a mother's love. She isn't craving designer handbags or a taste of high society. Her terror is quiet, suffocating, and painted in the red ink of final eviction notices. Every anxious, lingering glance she steals at the menu is a physical blow to the chest. To know that the price of an appetizer in this room could keep the lights on and feed her little girl, Zoe, for a week is a sick joke of reality. It's a very specific kind of psychological torture, being utterly destitute while drowning in the middle of grotesque abundance. Yet, just a few tables away, sitting in an entirely different universe of power, was Jackson Reed. From the outside, the young, formidable Sil looked invincible. His bespoke suit draped perfectly over a frame built for dominance. His eyes held the freezing detachment of a man who owned the world and cared for none of it. But I can tell you a secret about men like Jackson. The higher the throne, the harder the fall. Behind that mask of absolute control, his empire was burning. A vicious, bloodthirsty hostile takeover led by his ruthless rival, Victoria Blackwell, was tearing at the very foundations of his legacy. His board of directors was turning on him. They didn't trust a lone wolf, a man whose private life was so barren and heavily guarded that the media painted him as a heartless machine incapable of human connection. Jackson didn't need a brilliant new marketing strategy to save his life's work. He needed a shield. He needed a human prop, a devoted, picturesque wife to prove to his shareholders that he possessed the stability and moral compass of a true family man. And then, the universe struck its match. It wasn't Cupid's arrow that brought them together. It was the sheer, brutal instinct of survival. A clumsy waiter, a sudden commotion, an accidental stumble. And in an instant, Natalie and Jackson were forced into the same physical space just as the blinding flashes of the paparazzi breached the restaurant's glass windows. They were captured in a single, chaotic frame. A lesser man would have demanded the photos be destroyed. But Jackson's mind was a steel trap. I watched as the gears of an apex corporate predator shifted. He didn't offer her a charming smile, and there was no romantic spark in his gaze. He looked at her frayed cuffs, read the terrified desperation in her posture, and delivered a proposition as clinical and razor-sharp as a merger agreement. Pretend to be my wife. It is right here that the tired fairy tale dies and a masterpiece of human complexity begins. There was no sweeping romance. Jackson saw a desperate, proud woman who needed money but had the brains to play a part flawlessly. Natalie saw a terrifying, icy stranger who held the only key to her daughter's survival. Their collision was raw, transactional, and entirely stripped of sentimentality. They were two people standing on the edge of a jagged cliff, agreeing to use each other as a bridge to cross over. And honestly, that is exactly why you won't be able to look away. Because when two broken people build a foundation entirely on calculated lies, the only thing left to discover in the dark is the terrifying, beautiful truth. The Devil's Ink and the cold penthouse stepping off that jagged cliff, the first thing they had to build was the safety net, a binding legal contract that quantified exactly what a human soul was worth. I have seen countless corporate documents in my time, but the prenuptial agreement Jackson Reed's lawyers slid across the polished mahogany table was a masterpiece of emotional detachment. It was 50 pages of airtight stipulations, dictating everything from how many public appearances Natalie was required to attend, to the precise phrasing she must use when addressing the media, to the undeniable clause that under no circumstances was physical intimacy or genuine emotional attachment permitted. As I picture Natalie holding that Mont-Blanc pen, I can feel the tremor in her fingers. She was signing away her autonomy, her name, and her quiet life. But when she looked down at the paper, she didn't see legal jargon. She saw next month's rent, a warm winter coat for her daughter, and the absolute guarantee that Zoe would never know the gnawing ache of going to bed hungry. She signed her name with the steady, quiet dignity of a martyr stepping into the fire. Within 48 hours, the fragile universe Natalie and Zoe had known was packed into 3 duffel bags and relocated to the very top of the Manhattan skyline. Jackson's penthouse was exactly what you would expect from a man who viewed life as a series of hostile takeovers. It was a sprawling, sterile museum of glass, slate, and monochromatic modern art that lacked any pulse. Walking through those echoing hallways, I would have felt like an intruder in a mausoleum dedicated to loneliness. Jackson lived his life in perfectly measured compartments, and he fully expected his new, purchased family to occupy their designated corner silently. But he severely underestimated the explosive, irrepressible force of a 7-year-old child. Zoe was a burst of technicolor in a black-and-white world. She didn't understand that the brooding man in the bespoke suits was a corporate titan fighting for his professional life. To her, he was just the tall, quiet guy who suddenly lived with them. I love watching how this dynamic unfolds, because it is the ultimate proof that you cannot legislate human nature. You can draft 100 contracts demanding emotional distance, but they are absolutely useless when a little girl leaves her brightly colored crayons scattered across a $3 million marble kitchen island. At first, Jackson's reaction was rigid. He treated their presence like a logistical error that needed to be managed. He retreated to his study, burying himself in defense strategies against Victoria Blackwell's looming board coup. He built his walls higher, leaving Natalie to navigate the suffocating isolation of the penthouse. She played her part perfectly, ensuring she was nothing more than a ghost who kept out of his way, holding up her end of the bargain with flawless professionalism. Yet, the silence of that penthouse began to change. I noticed it in the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in Jackson's behavior. It started late one evening when he walked into the kitchen to find Natalie agonizing over Zoe's complex math homework. A man who commanded thousands of employees and managed billion-dollar hedge funds suddenly found himself drawn to the quiet frustration of a mother trying to do her best. Without a word, he sat down across from them, pulled the workbook toward him, and patiently explained fractions to a child who wasn't his. In that fleeting, unscripted moment, the cold, calculating billionaire vanished. Natalie looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the exhausted, deeply lonely man hiding behind the armor of his wealth. The ink on the contract dictated that they remain strangers, but as Jackson's deep voice softened while he spoke to her daughter, the borders of their transactional arrangement began to dangerously, beautifully blur. Yet, the walls of that immaculate penthouse could only isolate them for so long before they had to perform their deception for the wolves waiting outside. Smoke screens and the thawing of ice, the true test of their unholy alliance, began under the blinding, unforgiving glare of the public eye. The annual Manhattan Vanguard Gala was a battlefield disguised as a charity dinner, and it was here that Jackson and Natalie made their grand debut. If you have never been in a room full of New York's elite, let me tell you that they can smell weakness like blood in the water. Every smile is a calculation, and every handshake is a threat assessment. As Jackson guided Natalie out of the limousine, the flashbulbs erupted in a frenzied storm. She was draped in a breathtaking emerald silk gown that cost more than her entire college education. The 7-carat lie heavy on her left hand. I remember watching Jackson's hand slip to the small of her back. The contract stated they must appear devoted, but the sudden jolt of electricity that passed between them when they touched was entirely off script. Natalie stiffened, expecting the cold grip of a proprietor, but instead, she found a protective, anchoring warmth. As they navigated the sea of predatory journalists and skeptical board members, they fell into an intoxicating rhythm. Jackson, normally so guarded and unapproachable, leaned in to whisper instructions into her ear, but his breath against her neck made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Natalie played the part of the adoring wife with such fierce brilliance that she didn't just convince the press. She began to convince the man standing beside her. It is a profound psychological phenomenon when the masks we wear start to become our actual faces. The performance seeped into their private lives. The strict boundaries they had established in the penthouse slowly disintegrated into late-night conversations over glasses of scotch in the dimly lit living room. Jackson found himself waiting for the sound of Natalie's footsteps. He stopped eating his meals sequestered in his office and began joining her and Zoe at the dining table. I find it intensely moving to witness a man who has been starved of affection his entire adult life slowly realizing what he has been missing. He wasn't just surviving the hostile takeover anymore. He was coming alive. He learned that Natalie took her coffee black when she was stressed, and she learned that the tight clench of his jaw meant Victoria Blackwell had gained another percentage of company shares. But the most devastating crack in Jackson's armor was Zoe. The little girl had completely bypassed his defenses. There was a Tuesday evening that I consider the absolute turning point of their story. A severe thunderstorm had rolled over the city, knocking out the power in their block of the skyline. Zoe, terrified of the dark and the booming thunder, had run crying into the hallway. It wasn't Natalie who reached her first. It was Jackson. The ruthless CEO sat on the hardwood floor in the dark, wrapping his expensive suit jacket around the trembling child, whispering stories to her until she fell asleep against his chest. When Natalie found them, the look of raw, unshielded vulnerability in Jackson's eyes was a confession he wasn't ready to speak aloud. He was falling in love with them. Both of them. However, happiness in this world is a luxury that is rarely afforded without a heavy tax. While Jackson was distracted by the unfamiliar warmth of a family, his rival was sharpening her knives. Victoria Blackwell was not a woman who accepted defeat. She had noticed the way Jackson looked at Natalie at the gala, but more importantly, she had noticed the frayed edges of Natalie's past that the PR team hadn't completely scrubbed away. Victoria hired the best private investigators money could buy, digging their claws into the dirt of Natalie's financial ruin, searching for the one string that, if pulled, would unravel Jackson Reed's entire fabricated life. But in the ruthless theater of Manhattan's elite, every moment of stolen warmth inevitably draws the attention of a predator. Shattered illusions and the rivals strike the illusion of their perfect sanctuary was obliterated on a dreary, rain-soaked Thursday morning. I have always maintained that the most devastating betrayals don't come with a loud explosion. They arrive in a quiet, neatly sealed manila envelope. Victoria Blackwell chose the moment just before a critical board vote to unleash her poison. She didn't go to the press. She went directly to the board of directors, armed with undeniable proof of the financial transaction between Jackson's accounts and Natalie's creditors. She had uncovered the original drafts of the prenuptial agreement. The lie was exposed, laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. Victoria framed it not just as a deception of the public, but as a severe breach of fiduciary trust, painting Jackson as an unstable, desperate fraud unfit to lead a global empire. When Jackson returned to the penthouse that afternoon, the air around him was entirely different. The man who had sat on the floor comforting a frightened child was gone, replaced by the cornered apex predator from the restaurant. Panic and the instinct for absolute self-preservation had completely taken over. I watched with a heavy heart as he systematically shut down every emotion he had allowed himself to feel over the past few months. He believed that the only way to salvage his legacy and protect Natalie and Zoe from the incoming media slaughter was to sever the tie completely. He called Natalie into his study. He didn't look her in the eye. His voice was a flat, mechanical drone as he informed her that the contract was terminated effective immediately. He told her that her services were no longer required, that a substantial severance had already been wired to her account, and that a car was waiting to take her and Zoe wherever they wanted to go. The cruelty of his detachment was breathtaking. Natalie stood there, absorbing the crushing blow of his words. This is the moment I admire her the most. She didn't cry, and she didn't beg. She possessed a fierce, deeply ingrained pride that had kept her alive through her darkest days of poverty. She saw right through his self-righteous martyrdom. She knew he was pushing her away because he was terrified, not just of losing his company, but of the fact that he actually cared about losing her. "You can buy my time, Jackson," she told him, her voice remarkably steady, carrying a quiet power that seemed to dwarf his immense wealth. "But you cannot buy my dignity. And you certainly cannot buy the right to treat us like collateral damage because you're too cowardly to fight for something real." She didn't take the severance money. She packed the same 3 worn duffel bags she had arrived with, took her daughter's hand, and walked out of the penthouse, leaving the massive, blinding diamond ring sitting alone on the edge of his mahogany desk. The click of the front door closing echoed through the empty apartment with the finality of a gunshot. Jackson had succeeded. He had isolated himself from the threat, fortified his defenses, and ensured his sole focus could return to defeating Victoria Blackwell. He was completely, entirely alone. It is in the deafening silence of an empty room that a man finally hears the unmistakable sound of his own breaking heart. Ashes of the contract and the genuine vow. For 3 days, Jackson Reed lived in a fortress of his own making, and for 3 days, he realized that he had meticulously protected an empire that no longer meant anything to him. He sat at the head of the boardroom table, staring down Victoria Blackwell and the murmuring, discontented executives who were ready to strip him of his title. He had the defensive maneuvers prepared. He had the legal loopholes ready to deploy. But as he looked out at the sea of cold, calculating faces, all he could see was the vast, empty wasteland of his future. He realized, with a sudden, profound clarity, that he was fighting to keep a crown he didn't even want to wear if he had to wear it alone. The hostile takeover wasn't the tragedy of his life. Losing Natalie was. I will never forget the story of what happened next, because it is the moment Jackson shattered the mold of the ruthless billionaire. He didn't argue with Victoria. He didn't present a defense. Instead, he stood up, looked at his board, and calmly told them they could have the company. He surrendered his shares, stepped down as CEO, and walked out of the room, leaving the most powerful people in Manhattan sitting in stunned, absolute silence. He traded his life's work for the mere chance to fix the biggest mistake of his life. Finding Natalie wasn't easy. She had retreated to a modest, cramped apartment in Brooklyn, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms, free from the golden handcuffs of high society. When the heavy knock sounded on her door, she expected a landlord or a delivery. She did not expect to find a disgraced, former billionaire standing in the dimly lit hallway, his perfectly tailored suit soaked from the pouring rain. There was no pride left in him, no armor, no pretense. Jackson didn't offer her a contract, and he didn't offer her a job. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the original copy of their 50-page agreement. Right there, in the damp hallway, he flicked a silver lighter and set the document on fire, letting the burning ashes of their fabricated past fall onto the cheap linoleum floor. "I have nothing to offer you but myself," Jackson said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, trembling with a raw, desperate truth. "I don't have the company. I don't have the empire. But if you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to be Zoe's father and earning the right to hold your hand without a camera in the room." Natalie looked at the ashes on the floor, and then at the man who had burned down his entire world just to find her in the dark. The wall she had built around her own heart finally crumbled. She reached out, pulling him inside, out of the cold, and when their lips met, there was no audience, no paparazzi, and no hidden agenda. It was a kiss forged in the fire of absolute authenticity, a silent promise that some things are infinitely more valuable than a billion-dollar valuation. They didn't return to the penthouse. They built a new life, grounded not in wealth, but in the unshakable foundation of genuine love and mutual respect. Jackson discovered that his true strength never lay in corporate dominance, but in the quiet, mundane moments, making pancakes on a Sunday morning, helping Zoe with her science fair projects, and looking at Natalie with a devotion that no contract could ever enforce. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey here at Billionaire Bliss Audio. If the story of Jackson and Natalie reminded you that the greatest treasures in life cannot be bought, please leave a comment below and let us know what part moved you the most. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we have so many more deep, emotionally charged stories waiting just for you. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful truths are built on the ashes of our biggest mistakes. The story of Jackson and Natalie is a powerful testament to the unpredictability of the human heart and the hollow nature of material wealth when devoid of genuine connection. What began as a cold, calculated transaction, a billionaire purchasing a facade to save his corporate empire, and a desperate mother selling her autonomy to protect her child, ultimately transformed into a profound journey of self-discovery. Jackson's penthouse, once a sterile monument to his isolation, was slowly warmed by the irrepressible spirit of a little girl and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to lose her dignity. When faced with the absolute destruction of his fabricated life at the hands of a ruthless rival, Jackson's initial instinct to retreat only illuminated the agonizing emptiness of the empire he fought so hard to protect. His ultimate decision to surrender his company, his wealth, and his status to reclaim the family he almost lost proves that true power does not lie in boardrooms or bank accounts. It lies in the courage to be vulnerable and the willingness to sacrifice everything for authentic love. By burning the contract that once bound them, Jackson didn't just walk away from his past. He forged a new future built on the unshakable foundation of truth. Their journey reminds us that the most valuable assets we can ever acquire are the ones that money simply cannot buy: unwavering loyalty, unconditional love, and a home filled with genuine warmth. The profound lesson, the deepest lesson here, is that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is the ultimate form of courage. We often spend our lives building impenetrable fortresses around ourselves, using careers, money, or emotional detachment as armor to protect against being hurt. However, this armor only guarantees our isolation. True wealth and genuine happiness are only achieved when we are willing to let our guards down, step out of our comfort zones, and invest fully in authentic human connections. How to apply this to your life in today's fast-paced, success-driven world? It is incredibly easy to treat life like a series of transactions and view relationships through the lens of convenience. To apply this lesson, consciously choose to prioritize the people who matter over the relentless pursuit of professional or financial gain. Put down your phone during dinner, listen deeply to your loved ones without an agenda, and stop hiding behind your work when emotional challenges arise. Frequently ask yourself what you might be sacrificing in the name of ambition. Build your life's foundation on genuine moments, recognizing that a successful career means very little if you have an empty room waiting for you at the end of the day. We would love to hear from you. If you had to choose between reaching the absolute peak of your career and having a quiet, genuinely happy life with your loved ones, which would you choose and why? Please leave a comment below to share your perspective so our community can read and discuss your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating and bringing you more deeply moving stories just like this one.